Hey folks, I'm Brown Bear. Today's the first in a I don't know how long series discussing what I'm looking for in Age of Empires 4. Pretty much anything is fair game. Gameplay design, balance, community management, graphics, and so on. In general, I plan to play, make content for, and stream the game regardless of the state it's released in. That being said, I think it's good to refine my thoughts on the series before the game is released. If you're not familiar with me, I'm a longtime Age of Empires player going back all the way to Age of Empires 1. I was a top-ranked competitor in both Age of Titans and Age of Empires 3. Playing under the handle Parfait, I was the second best player in the world in the 2007 World Cyber Games. While I tend to approach these games from the competitive side, I try not to let that bias my perspective too much. Alrighty, without further ado, let's get into this video. Number 1. The Age Up System. The Age Up System is one of the most iconic features in the Age of Empires series. Getting it right should be priority number 1 for the developers. Aging Up provides the structure and the framework for these games. Each age features its own unique tone and style of gameplay. When you move from one age to another, it genuinely feels like the game has changed. Unit choices, available upgrades, and important mechanics like siege units are locked away to specific ages. Age of Empires 2 arguably did this the best. The first stage is long and quiet, 10 minutes of exploration and expansion. The second age is where the player starts to establish their strategy and lay down the groundwork for an empire. The combat is dominated by low-tech masses of weak units that provide just enough pressure to shape and mold the direction of the game. The third age is a substantial shift in tone. Players start laying down multiple town centers and expanding into 80 to 100 villager-sized economies. Armies transition to higher tech. If any unit defines the castle age, it's the knight. The range of units and technologies explode at this point. Races also finally have access to their unique castle unit. The fourth age is a culmination of the expansion of the third age. Players fight over the remaining resources on the map while teching up to the very best units and upgrades. A saturated economy, a bustling trade route, and established defensive fortifications work in combination to give the sense of a complete and sprawling empire. Age 2 isn't alone in this approach. You can observe many such transitions by looking at other games in the series. Moving from axemen to gold-dependent infantry in Age of Empires 1, seizing territory by laying down Migdal strongholds or hill forts in Age of Mythology, and moving into artillery and positioning-based combat in Age of Empires 3. It's important to note at this point that I don't necessarily expect Age 4 to duplicate the Age Up designs of the previous entries in the series. What matters to me is the way this mechanic structures and organizes the gameplay. A good point of contrast are Blizzard RTS games like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2. In these titles, the tiering of the technology tree is implicit. A player can pursue any path down the tech tree, even if it's disconnected from the rest of their units. For example, the Carrier is a Tier 3 unit only in the sense that it has more prerequisites than a unit like the Immortal. There isn't a single moment in time when a race moves from one tier to another. It's just implied by the quality of their forces. There's nothing wrong with this approach to tech, however it's just not how the Age games were structured. Age was always a bit more holistic. It felt like you were constructing a coherent empire. This created a sense of progression. Locking particular technologies and units behind discrete ages ensured that each aspect of the gameplay moved in unison. Technology, economy, and gameplay approach all adjusted at once when a player moved from one age to another. Age of Mythology and Age of Empires 3 arguably improved upon this formula by introducing choices alongside the Age Up system. This was a bit more impactful in Mythology because each minor god featured distinct units and upgrades. I think the key to making this work is ensuring the choices feel like they lead down different but equally valid paths. In sum, there are 3 things I'll be looking for when it comes to the Age Up system. How does it structure the gameplay? How does it inculcate a sense of progress? And how does it contribute to a sense of coherency and wholeness? Number 2. Randomly generated maps. The random map generator is both one of my favorite and most dreaded parts of the Age of Empires series. Coming from the competitive side, it was a pretty frustrating feature. Spawning onto a map with unfair gold distribution or poorly positioned settlements simply felt unfair. But regardless of my complaints, I think the feature is integral to the series. One reason for this is the variety it adds to the gameplay. You're not simply maximizing the efficiency of whatever build you're trying to follow. Instead, you're genuinely scouting the map, figuring out the pros and cons of your starting position, and formulating different tactics and strategy depending on what you see. Simple things like a good wood treasure in Age of Empires 3, or a particularly advantageous gold mine in Age of Mythology, can substantially shift what a player was planning to do. This makes each game feel unique and stand out a bit more than if they were to take place on static maps. Another nice side effect of procedural generation is a sense of exploration. Every game feels like a fresh start, a completely new seed that you've probably never seen before and will likely never see again. I honestly think this is one of the reasons I got into the series as a kid. I've always liked exploration adventure style games, and Age of Empires brought about that exact same feeling. On occasion, map features would be distinct enough that they could define an entire game. All players could become focused on a particularly critical choke point or particularly scarce stone and gold deposits. This was especially fun when playing team games because each game felt like a unique experience, a unique shared memory. I can still remember one particular team game from Age of Mythology where I rated my opponent's economies better than I ever had before. This was helped along by the generosity of the map generator, exposing my opponent's villagers far away from their town center. It was awesome, and my friends and I all had a good laugh about it. RNG is a tricky thing to get right in computer games. I could easily see a compromise here. Maybe static maps are the only way to make competitive 1v1 work. However, everything else can default to procedurally generated maps. In those cases, I'll be looking for what it adds to the experience. Is the generator varied enough to produce memorable games? Is it fair enough in its distribution of resources? And is it interesting enough to create a sense of exploration? Number 3. Balance between competitive and casual. Age of Empires has historically made sacrifices in its competitive design in order to be more accessible. It's bittersweet for someone like me who invested thousands of hours into getting good at these games, but they were simply not designed primarily for competitive play. The large number of units and races, the randomly generated maps, even the generally slower pace of the gameplay work together to dampen the competitive experience. I don't intend this as a criticism of the series. I only played the Age games competitively because I love to play them casually, and I simply wanted to go to the next level. All of the features that hurt the competitive side of Age also made the casual side more appealing. There's no way I would have played as many team games if the maps were static, or if there weren't a million different things to do. I think I would have gotten bored. Furthermore, it's not to say that I think the developers should ignore competitive gamers. In fact, I think it should be one of their top priorities. The key is that one game mode shouldn't overpower the others. Bruce Shelley, one of the original designers on the Age of Empires series, underlined this point when discussing its success. I think it sold well overall because it appealed to both online hardcore gamers and casual gamers. There were a lot of different experiences in the box, and players of all tastes could find a game that really suited them. For everyone, the game was bright and inviting. For online particularly, I think it was well balanced and challenging, and always a little different thanks to randomly generated maps. Age of Empires has historically tried to cater to a wide group of people, and it's done so pretty successfully. It's hard to do this if you heavily prioritize one particular game mode over all the others. It's especially hard if you try to do something very focused and niche, like turn a game into an esport. There's nothing inherently wrong with that approach, but personally I'd prefer Age 4 to balance the concerns of different audiences with relatively equal weight. I'll be looking for features like custom rule sets for different game modes, developer previews highlighting multiple dimensions of the game, and post-release updates offering substantial new content to both casual and competitive players alike. Number 4. Water-based gameplay. Age of Empires has featured water-based economic and military play since Age of Empires 1. Its core purpose with respect to gameplay design, as far as I'm concerned, is to encourage strategic diversity and tactical thinking. Players on a water map need to trade off investments on the water against investments on the land. It's typically impossible to win by focusing only on one or the other. Players need to prevent their opponent from monopolizing one aspect of the gameplay, but not get so sucked into it that they lose the other side completely. Looking back on my time with the series, many of my strongest memories stem from the water combat. I can only speak for myself when I say that Mediterranean is the most iconic map in Age history, particularly for team games. If you spawned on the outskirts, you were pushed into a hybrid build of helping out a bit on the water, while defending on land with walls and towers. If you spawned in the middle, you could greedily mass fishing boats and spend most of the rest of the game duking it out for control of the sea. This notion of having a completely separate class of economy and combat is a great example of Age of Empires' emphasis on breadth over depth. It's probably not particularly fair or realistic for a boat to attack units from the sea. What matters is that it's incredibly fun. Oftentimes the decision of how much to commit to the water came down to player preferences, even on the competitive side where things tended to be more optimized. Water became another avenue for players to express themselves and decide how they wanted to approach the game. To be totally honest, I would be surprised if this feature didn't receive substantial attention from the developers on Age 4. I'll be looking for how it contributes to strategic variety, builder differentiation, and the relatively subjective fun factor of water-land interactions. Alrighty, it's everything I had for today. Thanks for watching. I'll probably do a few more of these videos as I continue retrospecting on the series and identifying its key mechanics. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you subscribed to me here, as well as followed me on Twitter and Facebook to receive regular content updates. The relevant links are in the description below. All the best, and see you next time.